Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 262 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, the Orange Tank Nealon, and with me is Mark the Green Tank.
And with us is nobody. It is a twofer. We are without Kellen, but we got the two best tanks, so you shall be very joyful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If anything, we've just trimmed off the fat.
That's right.
You know, the stuff we didn't need. This is just what you're here for in its purest form.
This is not like a marbleized, I don't know, what's a marble cut of meat? Like a ribeye or something. I don't know. But this is a filet mignon. All the fat's been trimmed off. I don't know if any of this is accurate to meat, but I just want to compare ourselves to filet mignon and then Kellen to some other cut.
That's exactly right. This week on the show, we're going to be answering some reader questions. We built up quite the slew of questions over the time that we were just barreling down the top 50 list. So we're just going to answer some of those today. But before we do that, we're going to be talking about a couple of the games that Mark and I have been playing, namely Starship Captains and Dinosaur Gauge.
Yeah. The latest progression in the Gauge games. You have Irish, Iberian, and then obviously Dinosaur. It's a next natural
prequel.
step.
The prequel that
the
everyone
prequel.
wants.
That's right. Exactly. So let me get into it, I guess. So I got a chance to play Dinosaur Gauge, which is one of the latest games from indie publisher Hollandspiel and designed by Amabel and Mary Holland. This is Mary's first design, but Amabel is a longtime designer of cube rail games, of which Dinosaur Gauge is, having designed Irish and Iberian Gauge previously. And maybe you can see both sides of these design pedigrees in Dinosaur Gauge, but more about that a little bit later. As I mentioned, Dinosaur Gauge is a cube rail game, and for those who aren't familiar with the term, these are games that are train-themed, though perhaps not as strongly in Dinosaur Gauge, what with all the dinosaurs, and set themselves apart from many other train games for their usually relatively pared-down rules and, perhaps more importantly, the way they abstract away how railroads are built on their maps. So in many train games, you need to lay down just the right direction of track to link up with another specifically shaped track, and that's how you build your track out. In cube rail games, they do away with that by saying simply that if you have a cube in a spot, you're good to travel there. It just sort of makes that the geography and the track building much simpler. In Dinosaur Gauge, you'll be acting as a Dino Rail Baron. So I'm quoting from the rulebook here, so don't get mad at me. And thankfully, the puns improve from here on out, I think. And you're trying to pick up and devour while trying to make sure the companies you invest in do well in the stomp market. All right. I will do my best to stop, but again, these are from the rules, so do not blame me. Anyhow, the way this works in practice is you'll be taking all of your actions on this map made up of hexagons and divided in the middle by a large river. On your turn, the first thing you'll always do is draw a tile and place it on one of the water spaces. And when all the water spaces on this river have been covered with these land tiles that you're drawing and placing down, that triggers the end of the game. So it is the timer on the game, and it's a nice sort of visual cue to see how much time you have left because you just look at the stack of tiles. Then you get a chance to buy a stock if you want, and finally you take an action. So the actions that you can take are building track in a railroad that you own, making a delivery of products to a city that wants them, producing more goods if you have stock in one of the production companies, establishing airports through pterodactyls, of course. This all makes sense. Nealon has a quizzical look on his face, but it all makes sense. If you have stock in one of these pterodactyl airlines, which make these city spots more lucrative. Or the final action that you can choose from is recycling goods, which is a way to make some quick money and manipulate the value of the goods that are looking to be sold. Unlike many cube rails, at least the ones I've played, there are a lot of different companies to invest in and manipulate, as my brief explanation there might have indicated. In addition to the trains that deliver goods, as I mentioned, you can try to succeed by being a goods producer, investing in the airlines, and I didn't mention this part yet, but you can also invest in shipping companies where you get a benefit when goods are transported along your waterways over the river while it exists. And yet, with all that going on, as is a hallmark of cube rail games, it's a relatively simple game to teach and pretty straightforward to play, given your turns are pretty simple. Again, you're just drawing a tile, placing that tile, buying a stock if you want to, and then taking one of 5 different types of actions, 2 of which happen pretty infrequently. So basically, you're choosing from 3 main actions. So the rules, again, really get out of your way, and what you're left with are these really meaty decisions and a lot of shared incentives, which is another trait of many cube rail games where you're often trying to look to partner up with one of your opponents to maybe blend their production with your transportation, or maybe you decide to try to strike out on your own and do it all yourself, which is going to be tough, but perhaps more valuable, more lucrative if you control all aspects of the production and delivery. It's got a lot of interesting flourishes when it comes to decisions you have to make, including the fact that, for example, when you buy a stock in a train company, you're going to receive a number of cubes to lay out in a future turn for the company. And while you know exactly how many cubes you're receiving, the number you receive fluctuates with the number stock it is that you're buying. So, for example, to clarify that, the first time somebody buys a share in the yellow train, they get 7 cubes, which, again, they're going to place in a subsequent turn to lay down track for the yellow train. But then the second stock that goes for yellow only gives you 6 cubes. And the third stock gives you 4. And the final fourth stock only gives you 4. And each stock is different. So, like, for example, the white train goes from 5 cubes to, I think, 4 to 6 to 7. So each train has its own curve in terms of how many cubes the next stock purchaser gets to lay down track. So it's just another thing to consider, a way that makes the trains asymmetric, for example. And of course, that's not to, again, reiterate how many different avenues you have to go down, what with the producing and shipping and airports. And all this gets at what I mentioned earlier about it feeling like a game that is absolutely solid, and from a designer like Amabel Holland, who clearly knows her stuff and has tons of experience designing cube rail games, while also being co-designed by someone like Mary, who certainly has been around in cube rail games for much of her life, I assume, as one of the co-founders of Hollandspiel, but maybe a new designer, a first-time designer, perhaps being the genesis of where some of these new ideas in Dinosaur Gauge come from. I mean, who knows? Not me. I wasn't there, obviously, but it feels like something that might have happened. Anyway, I would certainly recommend Dinosaur Gauge to anyone who's a fan of cube rail games, particularly anyone who wants a cube rail game with a ton of different directions as far as which ways you can go. If you aren't a fan of cube rail games, this probably isn't going to be your thing, depending on what turns you off about them. If you aren't sure if you're a cube rail person or not, I'd recommend maybe dipping your toe in something like Irish Gauge or Chicago Express, which are sort of introductory cube rail games first, to see if you like the genre, and then giving this one a go. But it's one I'm certainly very excited to play again in the future, and that is Dinosaur Gauge by Amabel and Mary Holland.
So, Mark, I have recently revisited Iberian Gauge, which is a game that was in my top 50. Absolutely adore Iberian Gauge. And, you know, anytime I play Iberian Gauge, I'm just reminded about, like, how... I hate to use this word because it always feels like there's a better word for it, but how elegant the design it is. It accomplishes a lot with very, very little. Like, it's a very, very simple design where you kind of feel like the play space is incredibly large. Dinosaur Gauge almost feels like the opposite tack to that, where there just seems like to be a lot thrown at it. Do you get the sense that all of the stuff that's being added to the game is substantive and feels like it deserves to be there? Is kind of the appeal of it just like how many more systems there are to this compared to something like an Iberian Gauge?
I think that while there are, again, a lot of things that are added to this game, a lot of, again, different companies, different whole types of companies you can try out or buy stock in and manipulate, the rules still are pretty sparse given as much as there is to it. Like, for us to learn this game, none of us had played it before, learn it and get up to speed to playing it, and I think one of the players didn't have very much cube rails experience. It wasn't a very long affair. We hit the ground running pretty quickly and the play was smooth. For all the added bits, it still feels pretty elegant. Again, you know, it all comes down to the fact that there are only 3 really main actions you're going to be doing. So despite the fact there's all these different things that you can invest in and work on, it's still very streamlined. So I think that, you know, it won't be as streamlined as Iberian or Irish Gauge or Chicago Express, certainly, but it's not that far off given how much extra stuff is going on. So, I mean, I think if you like Iberian Gauge, you should certainly give this one a shot. I think that it may not be your favorite, and I don't think it's mine, but I think that if you like those kind of games, even to a moderate degree, I think you're going to like this one. I think it's interesting. It does cube rails, but with a number of interesting twists.
I mean, that in itself does sound appealing. And as someone that's like enjoyed working through, especially Hollandspiel's cube rail games, which is, to be perfectly honest, maybe the extent of my scope with them, I've enjoyed the way that they felt different from each other. So, I mean, it does at least sound like I should give this a go.
Because, like, when I first saw this game and when I first saw all the stuff that was going on, and, you know, when it comes to games that are in the train genre or whatsoever, I mean, I know cube rail games are known for being pretty straightforward and simple, but whenever you hear about a new train game, in and of itself, they sort of feel intimidating often, even to me as somebody who likes them. And then you see all these different like companies and systems added on, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be like a bear to try to even learn, much less figure out as I'm playing. But it's really not. It's pretty straightforward. So I would encourage people who are maybe a little justifiably fearful of a game that seems to offer so much that they maybe sound a little intimidating. I really think it's pretty straightforward. It's very standard cubes rally in that respect. So yeah, definitely try it out if you like those kind of games.
Cool. I mean, that sounds great. So I am going to be talking about Starship Captains. So this maybe in some ways couldn't feel more of the opposite direction from Hollandspiel so whole vibe, because this is CGE, which, you know, they're one of the bigger publishers in the business. This has very lavish production values. This is I'm going to just say a Star Trek themed game. Like, the game 100% leans into the idea that it's riffing on Star Trek, but from the way that the characters look on the front cover, like the designs of their uniforms. It is a game where you have a starship, you're traveling from planet to planet to planet, doing away missions in order to get victory points. The game board is basically presented sort of just as I said, as just like a map of interconnected planets, and your player board represents the ship itself. You have a bank of crew, which come in 3 different colors, 4 if you count the cadets, which represent the different room types that those crew members can use. So you can have red, blue, and yellow crew members and these gray cadets. There's another room color gray, which is the only room that the cadets can use, but any of the other crew members can also use that gray room. So I hope that makes sense. So red people can use the red room and the gray room, but cadets who are gray can only use the gray room. Cadets can at some point be upgraded to one of those 3 colors. So over the course of the game, you'll be collecting medals. So you might want to upgrade a cadet to one of those crew colors. And if you get 3 of those medals, you're going to be able to upgrade those crew to commanders. So there's a little interplay there of trying to figure out what direction you're going to be pushing cadets, what colors you're going to be working towards, and whether you're going to bank up those medals in order to promote your crew to commanders. But what are you going to be doing a lot of these crew? Well, on your turn, you're going to pick one of 2 things. You're either going to be completing an away mission at the planet you're at, and we'll talk about that first because that's kind of effectively what you're trying to do to get points. A lot of these planets have missions associated with them, which you kind of just think of as effectively contracts that require crew. So let's say that there's an away mission that requires 4 crew members. Now, you could just assign any crew member to that mission, but there will also be specific designations, like, say, for example, ideally you would want 2 red crew members and a yellow crew member. And if you match those colors, you'll get additional rewards as well. So you're incentivized to go to missions where the colors will line up, but if you wanted to in a pinch, you just have to have enough crew to fulfill that mission in order to get the points. The other thing you can do on your turn if you're not completing an away mission is utilizing these rooms. So you might want to go to the engine room, which a specific color crew member will be able to use, which, as you'd expect, move your ship around the map. You might want to repair damage on your ship. You have, at the start of the game, a number of cargo holds for picking up rewards that you'd be getting from these missions, and some of those are damaged. So at the start of the game, you're going to have to repair some of them. You also have like a tech board, which is also damaged at the start of the game. By repairing that, you get access to new tech cards, which are either going to be passive upgrades or new rooms. So you might say, okay, here's a cool new blue room. I'm investing a lot in blue crew members for this game. So I'm going to utilize this new tech room, which is going to give me like a slightly supercharged ability or something that's different from the basic blue room on your player board. So broadly, those are the 2 things you're going to be choosing to do between your turn. Utilize the rooms on your ship or complete an away mission. So as you're traveling around this map, some of these routes between planets also have pirates along the way. There are some planets that aren't away missions, are just replenishing rewards. You also can see at regular intervals throughout the game plays over several rounds, where you'll be getting new cadets. And again, cadets are the most useless crew, so you're incentivized to get medals to upgrade them and so on. One of the things that seemed interesting about this system was this idea that when you utilize a crew for a room or onto an away mission, they kind of go into this queue where you have this inset board and you take the crew piece, which are these sculpted plastic pieces, and you slide them into this very ordered queue where whatever you put out in first is going to come back out into your ready room to be available in the next round.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at pictures of the game now, and that actually does look like a pretty cool component. It's like in the shape of a ship, and you have the crew members lined up in this thin queue, and then they sort of seem to be dumped out into like the main bridge of the ship.
Yeah,
sort of.
totally. So it's one of those things that when I would see pictures of this game, and it's not an elaborate production in
Right,
terms of how that's
right.
implemented, but it seems like, oh, there must be something interesting about this mechanic of
Yeah.
like putting, okay, I'm going to choose to put these people into the mission first so that they come out first later.
Yeah, timing seems to be like a part of the decision making when you see something like this.
So I'm kind of disappointed to say that that's kind of a little bit neutered, because really all that happens is every crew member except for the last three just dumps back out into your ready room. So all that really matters is that you're more cognizant about the last three crew members you're using in a given round, which kind of just feels like it was a component design in search of a better mechanic to some extent. But regardless, there's a little bit of thinking about like, you know, what crew members you're using towards the end of the round versus the beginning, but not as much as that might suggest. And ultimately, this kind of just starts to feel, if you strip away the theme, if you strip away the production, what you're kind of left with is a fairly vanilla pickup and contract for full game where you're traveling around the map, getting crew members to full contracts. It's lovingly produced. I do think it is a lovely Star Trek themed game, which is a very, very specific sub niche of sci-fi to some extent. But I just thought it was a fairly middling Euro game mechanically, unfortunately.
I can see friends who aren't necessarily board gamers who are into Star Trek specifically, but, you know, sci-fi to a lesser extent, you know, and the table presence, at least in the pictures I'm seeing, is pretty nice. It is inviting. And from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like it's overly complicated.
It's not.
Is this a game that you could introduce to, you know, non-gamers who maybe like the theme and would be into the production?
It wouldn't be my first choice.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because I played this with my brother. And my brother is, I wouldn't say he's a non-gamer, but he's not a regular recurring gamer, right? He loves Star Trek. Like,
okay.
So it was like in his wheelhouse, but
Yeah.
like, we'll play this together. And his reaction coming out of it was like, well, I kind of loved how that felt like Star Trek, but it was kind of boring.
Oh, God.
I was just like, oh, I mean, well,
That's
welcome to Eurogames, my friend.
Sure.
It was just like, I think he was expecting something that was kind of more, you know, like thematically exciting,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I don't know that this sort of very bare bones vanilla Euro game is going to appeal to like someone as their introduction to like this style of what could be a vibrant, exciting game. Yeah. And the thing is, you know, look, CGE are very good at making games. It's hard to really find the flaws in them mechanically. And what I mean by that, for example, is like something like Lost Ruins of Arnak, which again is another game that I don't think is particularly exciting, but you can tell it's refined. You can tell it's honed. And this kind of feels that. Like, there's not much luck in this game, for example. You see everything that's coming out from round to round. The way that even the away missions show up is like predicated in a very specific order. You will see where the next away mission is going to show up on the map so that you can almost plan to head in that direction. It does clever things like that in the design, but it just feels like it's not offering anything really exciting other than the presentation and the theme.
Right. That's too bad.
So yeah, a little bit disappointing to me. It's one that I wanted to be good based on the theme alone, at least. But that is Starship Captains by CGE. So before we get to your questions, just a couple of things in the middle. Mark, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, I've got a couple things coming up. First, on Tuesday, February 7th, I'm going to be on an episode of Classic Callback with Lindsay and Aaron. We're going to be talking about, this is not board game related, although Aaron has a board game podcast called Boards Live that we've been on before. But I'm going to be on with them talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Dr. Strangelove. So I'm excited about that. And then on February 11th at 10 a.m., I will be on with Casey and Miguel on their stream Brain in a Jar. So this will be on their Twitch stream, and I'll be playing a game of Cuba Libre. So finally get that one crossed off my list after having on my top 50 games for so long and not having played it for a while. But I will be playing it with them, and the way we're going to be doing it is we are each going to have our own copy of the game. And for those who aren't familiar with Cuba Libre, it is a card-driven game, so you base your actions on the cards that are drawn off a deck. So we're going to mirror each other's boards, but Casey's stack of cards is going to be the stack that we're going we're going to work off of. And then when she pulls a card, I'll be taking actions on my own board. So interesting way to play the game, one that I've heard other people champion as a way that works. So very, very excited to play that with them. So yeah, next week on the 7th, Cult Classic Callback, Dr. Strangelove, and then February 11th at 10 a.m. playing Cuba Libre with Casey and Miguel on their Brain in a Jar stream.
Something else I want to just mention here is we just put out a bonus episode on the Patreon. We do this every month. This is where we're talking about other stuff that we've been doing, whether that's the books that we've been reading, video games, shows and TV, in Kellen's case, musical theater. So yeah, a pretty different selection of the stuff that like appeals to us outside of the board game world. And the return of the Blue Tank Christina. So you can check that out on our Patreon at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. As well as that, there are other fun rewards. If you're in our Discord, there are secret Patreon channels. There are Discord roles. And we even had a Patreon get-together around Dice Tower West at Mark's Place last year. So yeah, lots of fun little things going on if you're a patron.
We also have the off-the-record episodes, which are mini episodes we record after recording these main episodes. So there's always something new on the feed over there.
And as a reminder, you can check that out at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon or patreon.com/boardgamebarrage, whichever one of those you prefer. Let's get back to our episode. We're going to be reading some questions from the mailbag.
All right. You got to do it.
You know what that means, Mark?
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite sound. So reach into the mailbag.
The people have been clamoring for that for so long.
Yeah.
Well,
you're
give him another hit. Give him another hit.
Yeah. That's the mailbag sound, everybody.
Great.
Yeah, just clip that and play that on repeat as your ringtone. Our first question comes from Greeld? I think this might be a typo. Gerald, maybe? But let's just say Greeld. Hi, guys. Happy holidays. Do you have any go-to holiday games? If not, what are some things you got played with the family this year? Mark, anything that comes to mind?
I mean, so my family holiday games are sort of ones that are party games that appear on our top 50 list mainly, like Time's Up or, code names, things like that. But one that I got a chance to play this year was one actually that my girlfriend picked up based on board game TikTok. So she's not a board game addict like we are, but she, for whatever reason, dips into board game TikTok, which is a avenue of board game media that I'm not familiar with. But she saw a game called Fire in the Hole that she was enamored with, where you are playing as pirates, and the way that it works is it's sort of like, it's a dexterity game for sure, but you have this ship that you place in the middle of the table that is like in the form of like a pop-up book. So you open this board up and this three-dimensional ship pops up, and then you draw a card, and it's going to tell you how you're going to throw these little felt balls into the ship. And the ship is like broken up into segments, like sort of tic-tac-toe, but I think it's like 10 by 10 or 8 by 8. And you've got the sails and the mast in the way and stuff like that. So you'll draw a card and it tells you how you're going to throw a felt ball in, and you're trying to get 4 in a row. But there are things like, all right, this time you've got to wear an eye patch when you throw it in. Or this time you've got to throw 2 balls, 1 in each hand simultaneously. Or you've got to throw with your eyes closed. Stuff like that. It's like a very silly but dexterity game with this lovely production. And the fact that it looks like a pop-up book adds to it. So it was a silly, fun game that I would recommend for folks looking for a silly, fun family game.
I was looking at the BGG page for this. It actually looks quite lovely, like visually.
The production is amazing. The production is top rate for sure.
But there's definitely a line of description that is like, Kickstarter sensation with videos hitting over 1 million views on TikTok. I was like, is this just a world that we're not aware of?
Yeah,
like
probably.
TikTok sensation board games?
Yeah, exactly. I fear it might be.
That's amazing. For me, like, I've usually had a lot of good luck with, I mentioned this before, but Deep Sea Adventure is a game that I had legit been able to get the whole family, by which I include my dad, who never really plays board games. But this holidays, I was mostly playing stuff with my older brother. I mentioned Starship Captains earlier in the episode. We started playing The Initiative, which was a game that I'd heard mixed things about, but like some positive buzz that got me interested. It's a game about code breaking that plays out over like a campaign. I'm intrigued by this. We didn't get to finish the campaign, so I'll probably just have to barrel through the rest of it solo and see where that goes. Other than that, we played a fair bit of Undaunted Normandy, which is becoming like a new 2-player favorite for us, and a few rematches of Caesar, which we had sort of grew to love the last time I was down in South Africa. So we're eager to get back to that.
Yeah, I remember you talking about it last time. Are you guys like high-level Caesar players now? I feel like after so many repeated
No, it's a funny thing where I think that we got really, really into like the last time I was down. So we only played it a couple of times, and then there was just like this like, let's try something else. So not like out of lack of enthusiasm, to be clear, but just because my brother is only sort of like a mildly enthusiastic board gamer. So like anytime I bring stuff down, he's always just intrigued to see what it is. I had really, really wanted to get the new Undaunted, the Stalingrad campaign, which I've just heard people raving about, but I wasn't able to get in time to head that way. So we just made do with Normandy, which is still excellent.
Nice.
But yeah, that was kind of it for me for my holiday gaming. Okay, next question. What are you looking forward to this year? I personally am really excited for Weather Machine, although I know you're not big fans of Mr. Lacerda. I hope to hear what you think. Eduardo.
Actually, Weather Machine is a game that I'm really excited about. But before we go into too much about games we're excited about, we're actually going to hold off on answering this question full because actually, games we were looking forward to would have been the topic of the show before Kellen had to bow out. So that'll likely be the next episode for those who are looking forward to that. So yeah, that'll be games that we are looking forward to in the upcoming year.
As for Weather Machine, funny enough, I saw a copy of this in the wild just this weekend, which I didn't realize had come out yet, but I guess it's already started to ship out to backers. I remember reading the rules for Weather Machine and kind of being a little bit tepid on it. It just seemed like the things I didn't love about Lacerda designs. But look, you make a game that looks as good as the Ian O'Toole Lacerda games look. I'm always a little bit interested just from an aesthetics and like trying to see how all of the mechanics interconnect. There's always like something there that does appeal to me. So yeah, I'll check it out. I'm not expecting to be blown away by this one, but I say that instantly hyped for whatever he's doing with like the civilization genre, which I think is his next project. Okay. Moving on to our next question. This one comes from Nate in Ohio. Hi all, just finished your top 10 and I was surprised to see Agricola breaking into Mark's list. Not that I have anything against it, it's a fine game, but I'm curious what was your biggest surprise from the other tanks' top 50s? I will say that almost to like mirror Nate's thought here, Agricola is a great game, so I would never be like upset or surprised or like that's a weird choice. But yeah, I'm always like pleasantly surprised by games that break into Mark's top 50 from like out of nowhere. I love that when you just feel like you've played a game that's really, really just like shaking you to your core over the course of like a year. That's awesome.
Yeah, it absolutely. I mean, I currently probably have 3 or 4 games of Agricola going on right now on BGA. I feel like it is such a refined game in some ways because, you know, it's a game where a lot of it is in the cards, but there's such a breadth of cards. So many cards that you can choose from in that initial draft, and it's a game that's been around for so long and has so many expansions that it's just such a rich tapestry of cards to choose from and try to figure out what combinations you're going to make. And the worker placement of the game itself is so cutthroat and yet straightforward and simple to understand. You don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how the spots work and rules questions. It's all pretty straightforward and simple. So just a combination of like depth but with simplicity that I just really appreciate.
So a couple that come to mind for me, I had heard early rumblings of Kellen's pleasant surprise with Tzolk'in, but I never would have imagined it would have made his top 50. So like a game that I genuinely wasn't, I've been half jokingly, I've been wanting to play this with Kellen for a long time. It's just the opportunity's never rolled around, but kind of suspected that he wouldn't love it, like he would admire its systems but not really, really love it. So to hear it really clicked with him enough to go into his top 50, I think was really, really surprising, but very, very cool. And the other one I remember thinking for you, Mark, was a Marvel Champions.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Just by virtue of being like a solo game that's shot up your list this year.
Yeah, on your list, I was anticipating where Blood on the Clock Tower would fall because that is a game that can be very contentious, but I know that you've really had a great time with it, so I was interested to see where it landed. And even though it's not a game for me, I was happy to see it land so high on your list. Also very happy to see Raw, a game that I love, make its debut high on your list as well. And was sort of surprised by Bear Raid because it's a game that I've yet to play, but I know it's a pretty involved economic game. And the fact that you put it on your top 50 made me like sort of double my interest in getting it finally acquired or getting it to the table. So that was one of the biggest surprises for me on your list.
Yeah, my reaction to that is I actually think what's great about Bear Raid is it's actually not that convoluted. It's a sort of like economic game that feels especially up your alley, because I know you're going to be very good at it, but it's actually quite simple mechanically.
Yeah.
Like, it has one thing that is like hard to wrap your head around, but other than that, it's a fairly simple mechanical game. And we've joked about the Dice Tower West list a lot, but I think it would be a crime if we came to Vegas and didn't play this with you.
Yeah.
Because it's such a Mark game, and Kellen loves it as well, so it just seems like one we have to get played.
Speaking of Kellen, we have the annual Kellen puts a card game, often Japanese, on his list that I am not familiar with, and then I hear about it from him and go on to play it and love it. This has happened before with Throne and Grail and with Photograph/One, the film. And this year it was a game that I don't think I'd ever heard about, Boast or Nothing. So that is a game that I am not familiar with that instantly went on my games that I really want to play list. So
Okay, our last question comes from Aaron, and they ask, now that you've done 250 episodes, congrats by the way, has something changed in the way you play games? Do you think you enjoy playing games more or less?
Oh, a nice, easy question to wrap it all up. I will say that one thing that doing a podcast and knowing that I'm going to be talking about games on a regular basis has forced me to hopefully get better at is being able to analyze games on the fly, which is a skill that I've always admired. And I think I've talked about this before on the show, that I think that you and Kellen are fantastic at. There have been many games that the 3 or 4 of us have played, and then immediately after playing it, you and Kellen will start analyzing it, and I will still sort of just be, I don't know, just still caught in the grips of like what I could have done better or what caused me to win or lose. And you guys are just breaking the game down right there. And I've always admired that. And I've tried to get better at doing that. So I think that's, in terms of my game to game, how the podcast has affected me, it's really made me focus on, as I'm playing, appreciating not just the competitiveness or what the game offers on a turn by turn thing, but like just understanding what the game has to offer on a like overall mechanical level or overall analysis of the game sort of overview.
It is funny because like I don't mean to use this as an excuse for why I frequently lose games against you when I'm playing them for the first time, but I can always just imagine that there's nothing more paramount to you than when you're playing the game than trying to figure out the win.
Right.
But there is this element of me whenever I play a new game of, I was thinking about this just recently actually, because I was playing Tyletum, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, the newest T game by the Italians, Toschini and Luciani, and there's a lot to kind of really unpack there with how it kind of refines mechanics. And I just couldn't help but feel like I was just, throughout the entire time I was playing with it, I was kind of like trying to put it in the context of their other games and be like, okay, this is interesting. This is the system it sort of takes from this game.
Right.
And this is how they've smoothed off this system. It is something that I think that like is just endemic to the fact of having done the podcast as long as we have, which is I'm already trying to think about like how I would describe this game in terms of what it's doing and like where it sits in like the pantheon of other games. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. It's a little bit like, I used to think about this a lot when I was working in visual effects, and anytime you'd watch a film and see a visual effect on screen, you're just deconstructing it.
Yeah.
You're not like even just sitting back and watching the film anymore. You're being like, oh, it's interesting how they did that smoke simulation. It's silly, but like it does detract to some extent from your enjoyment, but it also like pivots it into like a different realm of enjoyment where I'm kind of like appreciating it for different things. It's not necessarily better or worse. Like, I'm not enjoying a game when I play it, especially if it's a game that's new to me, purely on the basis of just playing the game. But deconstructing it does give a kind of a joy to me, like trying to see like what it's doing, how it's doing it differently, especially if I'm playing a new game by a familiar designer. Like I every time we play a new game from Reiner Knizia, so for example when we were playing like Zoo Vadis, it's like you're imagining all the steps that someone like a designer like that would go through to like every decision that goes into the game. There is sort of a joy in trying to like work that out that's like entirely independent, not entirely independent, but somewhat separate from playing the game. And yeah, I wouldn't say I enjoy games any less, I guess, to summarize.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because part of me was worried when the podcast was like really picking up steam that I would get to a point where you hear this from a lot of critics, or you hear this about a lot of critics where, you know, their enjoyment of movies or books or whatever they're reviewing can sort of wane because they've seen so much of it, and it really takes something special to make them interested. And I don't know if this is like a side effect of the fact that I'm still not as good as breaking down games as the two of you, but I still really enjoy games whenever we play them. Like, we'll go through a bit where we're playing a bunch of games and, I'll get a little bit of a burnout, and I'll wonder if that's like has to do with the podcast and just the need or the expectation I have to like keep playing games to talk about them on the show. And then I won't play games for a little while, and then all of a sudden I'll get like a really bad itch to play again. So like I'm still enjoying the games despite having done so many episodes.
I think one of the things also that always reassures me is whenever I end up playing like a very, very silly game, like we spoke about Nana last week, which is a shockingly silly game, a very, very simple game. My enjoyment for those has not diminished at all.
Right.
Like I think the cliche is, as you get like more and more of like a connoisseur about anything, your ability to appreciate the simple stuff goes away. But like, no, playing a game like that with people that you love playing games with is still its own reward.
I agree.
I think that's going to do it for our mailbag episode. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you want to reach out to us, you can send us your own question. You can send us an email at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on our social media, whether that's on Facebook or on Twitter. You can search for Board Game Barrage. You'll find them there. Otherwise, the aforementioned Patreon is at patreon.com/BoardGameBarrage. And as always, probably one of the best ways to talk to us is on our Discord. This is a online chat room which you can access on your phone. Very easy. Sometimes it can be intimidating because it moves pretty fast, but just hang around, get the feel of the flow of it, and jump in and start talking to people. Everyone there is really, really, really friendly.
Yeah, we've had a number of first-time Discord users, not just to our Discord, but Discord in general, who've joined recently, and I think they've had a good time. And a good place to ask us questions on that Discord is we have a feedback channel, which is devoted primarily to questions you have on the show or topics you'd like discussed on the show. So that's a good avenue to go for if you have questions you'd like us to talk about.
And yeah, if you're not already there, that is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord.
Just another reminder that I'll be on next Tuesday's episode of Cult Classic Callback with Lindsay and Aaron talking about Strangelove. And then on the 11th, I'll be on with Casey and Miguel on the Brain in a Jar Twitch channel, February 11th at 10 a.m. playing Cuba Libre.
Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Mark,
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite sound. So reach into the mailbag.